Once upon a time in Calabar, there lived a powerful and great king. King Ohaneze was a great leader and warrior who led his men into many battles. He fought and conquered all his enemies. He has taken possession of all the surrounding countries, killing all the old men and women, but the able-bodied men and girls he caught and brought back as slaves. They worked on the farms until they died. As powerful as this king was, he lacked something in his life, and this gave him sleepless nights. This king had 200 wives, but none of them had been able to bear him a son. This wasn't small trouble at first, but as he started growing old, it became obvious that if he didn't take proper measures, he might never father any child at all. He invited prominent and powerful native doctors from far and near to perform divination for him, but none of them could tell what was wrong. They all claimed the gods had refused to show them anything concerning the situation of the king. This frustrated the king and made him bitter. He went from a kind king to a wicked and tyrant king. He made life a living hell for those who lived in his palace. Whenever he walks into the palace, everyone hides their face for fear of his wrath. This went on for a long time, until one day, a foreigner paid a visit to the village. This foreigner was a powerful and renowned priest, and he asked to be taken to see the king. The villagers thought, this man mustn't love his life. The king didn't want to see any priests, since they couldn't provide a situation to his current dilemma. Upon getting to the palace, he requested to see the king. And on this day, the king was in a good mood, and he granted him audience, saying, "Let's hear what this one too will say." The king asked him to introduce himself and state why he insisted on seeing him and not send a message through his messenger. The priest acknowledged and greeted the king and told him he was a messenger from the gods. This time, the king's attention was drawn. After hearing it was a message from the gods, the king is a man who revered the gods. Even when they didn't provide answers to him, he still pays them his due diligence. The priest told him that the gods had sent him, that your plea for children will be heard, on the condition that you take on a new wife. The king heard the priest, but he wasn't ready to take another wife, after none of his 200 wives had borne him any child. A few moments later, the king's loyal subjects came pleading to him to take away from one of the spider's many daughters, as a daughter of a spider has always been known to have plenty of children. But when the king saw the spider's daughter, he did not like her, as she was ugly, and the people said it was because her mother had too many children at the same time. However, to please his people, he married the ugly girl and placed her among his other wives. But they all complained because she was so ugly and said she could not live with them. The king, therefore, built her a separate house for herself, where she was given food and drink the same as the other wives. Everyone cheered at her on account of her ugliness, but she was not ugly, but beautiful, and she was born with two skins. At her birth, her mother was made to promise that she would never remove the ugly skin until a certain time arrived, save only during the night, and that she must put it on again before dawn. The king's head wife was aware of this and was very fearful lest the king should find out about this condition and fall in love with the spider's daughter. So, she went to a juju man and offered him 200 cowries to make a potion that would make the king forget altogether that the spider's daughter was his wife. This, the juju man, Dibia Okafor, finally consented to, after much haggling over the price. For 350 cowries, and he made up some powder substance, which the head wife mixed with the king's food. For some months, this had the effect of making the king forget the spider's daughter, and he used to pass quite close to her without recognizing her in any way. When 4 months had elapsed, and the king had not once sent for Adaobi, for that was the name of the spider's daughter, she began to get tired and went back to her parents. Her father, the spider, then took her to another juju man who, by making spells and casting several lots, very soon discovered that it was the king's head wife who had made the juju and had enchanted the king so he would not look at Adaobi. He therefore told the spider that Adaobi should give the king some medicine which he would prepare. This would make the king remember her. He prepared the medicine, for which the spider had to pay a large sum of money. And that very day, Adaobi made a small dish of food, into which she had placed the medicine and presented it to the king. Directly after he had eaten the dish, his eyes were opened, and he recognized his wife. He told her to come to him that very evening. So, in the afternoon, being very joyful, she went down to the river and washed. When she returned, she put on her best clothes and went to the king's palace. Directly it was dark, and all the lights were out. She pulled off her ugly skin, and the king saw how beautiful she was, and was very pleased with her. But when the cock crowed, Adaobi pulled on her ugly skin again and went back to her own house. This she did for 4 consecutive nights, always taking the ugly skin off in the dark and leaving before daylight in the morning. Over time, to the great surprise of all the people, particularly of the king's 200 wives, she gave birth to a male child, whom the king named Chinaza, translated to God answer my prayers. But what surprised them most of all was that only one son was born, whereas her mother always had a great many children at a time. It was said that a spider has never given birth to less than 50 children at once before, and her mother had given birth to 110 children at a go. This birth of a son rocked the whole kingdom, as the king celebrated this with pomp and pageantry. But this same birth of a son angered the king's head wife. She became more jealous than ever when Adaobi had a son. So she went again to Dibia Okafo and gave him a large present, inducing him to give her some new medicine that would make the king sick and forget his son. The medicine would then make the king come to Dibia Okafo, who would tell him that it was his son who had made him sick. Dibia Okafo would also tell the king that if he wants to recover, he must throw his son away into the river. And the king, when he had taken the medicine, started complaining of being sick and feeling tired. He went to Dibia Okafo, who told him everything had been arranged with the head wife. But at first, the king did not want to destroy his son. The king, upon getting back to his palace, summoned his chiefs and his cabinet members and laid out what the priest told him about his just born son. After much consideration and deliberations, his chiefs and subjects told him that to secure his life, he had to do as the priest told him, saying, since the gods had given him this one, perhaps in a year, they might surely bless him with another son. So, the king at last agreed and threw his son into the river with bitterness, at which the mother grieved and cried bitterly. Then, the head wife went again to Dibia Okafo and got more medicine. This was to make the king forget Adaobi totally. This made the king forget Adaobi for 3 years, during which she was in mourning for her son. She then returned to her father. Her father was annoyed at this, and he decided to go back to their juju man. He got some more medicine from Kwame the water juju man, which Adaobi gave to the king. This medicine opened the king's eyes to Adaobi, and the king knew her and called her to him again, and she lived with him as before. Kwame, who had helped Adaobi's father, the spider, was the water juju man, and he was ready. When the king threw his son into the water, he saved his life, took him home, and kept him alive. He trained Chinaza, and he grew up to be a very strong boy. All this while, Adaobi never knew that her son was still alive. But her father knew about it all the time, but decided to keep it from her. After a time, Adaobi gave birth to a daughter, Ada. The king was happy with this, and he celebrated the birth of his daughter, but he still wanted a male child. He sometimes regrets the decision he made to throw his son into the river. The king's head wife was still not done. She visited Dibia Okafo and paid him again to give her something to help her control the king. Dibia Okafo gave her another powder and told her to blow this at the entrance of the king's chamber before she entered, and the king would do anything she told him to without any hesitation. After doing this, she went in and persuaded the king to throw his newborn daughter, Ada, away. At first, the king tried to resist her, but he finally gave in after the medicine started working on him. He agreed and threw his daughter into the water too, and forgot who Adaobi was again. This time again, as a powerful Dibia, who usually performs divination every day. Kwame had seen this occurrence in his divination and was ready again to go save this child. And when he had saved Ada, he thought the time had arrived to punish the action of the jealous wife. So, he went about amongst the young men and persuaded them to hold a wrestling match in the marketplace every week. This was done, and Kwame told the king's son, who had become very strong and was very like his father in his appearance, that he should go and wrestle, and that no one would be able to defeat him no matter how heavily built the person is. It was then arranged that there should be a grand wrestling match to which all the strongest men in the villages were invited, and the king was invited to attend with his 201 wives. On the day of the match, Kwame told the king's son that he need not be in the least afraid, and that his juju was so powerful that even the strongest and best wrestlers in the village would not be able to stand up against him for even a few minutes. All the people of the country came to see the great contests. The king promised to present prizes of clothes, money, land, and a chieftaincy title to whoever came out victorious at the end of the match. These presents drew many strong men from villages to attend this wrestling match. When they saw the king's son, whom nobody knew, they all laughed and said, "Who is this small boy? He can have no chance against us." Some even went ahead saying, "Who has forgotten to take his kid from the wrestling arena?" It was now time to wrestle, and everyone that came to wrestle found out that they were no match for this small boy. Chinaza was very strong indeed, beautifully made, and good to look upon. Many people were surprised to see how similar he was to the king. Many of them said amongst themselves, "I could swear on my life that is the king's son that was drowned." After wrestling for many hours and defeating 22 contestants, everyone now started looking at him differently. The time came for him to fight with the last man, who was the overall champion in his village. He looked like something molded out of a mountain, but this didn't scare Chinaza, as he remembered what Kwame had told him before the beginning of the match. With great determination in his mind, he allowed himself to be picked up by this bolder man. and he immediately gave this man an elbow between his head. This sends the bolder man to a sudden shock, and he slumped down. Chinaza was declared the winner, having thrown everyone who had stood up against him. In fact, some of his opponents had been badly hurt and had their arms or ribs broken, owing to the tremendous strength of Chinaza. After the match was over, the king presented him with clothes and money and invited him to dine with him in the evening. Chinaza gladly accepted his father's invitation, and after he had had a good wash in the river, put on his clothes and went up to the palace, where he found the head chiefs of the country and some of the king's most favored wives. They then sat down for their meal, and the king had his son, whom he didn't know, sitting next to him. On the other side of Chinaza sat the jealous wife, who had been the cause of all the trouble all through the dinner. This woman did her best to make friends with Chinaza, with whom she had fallen violently in love with, on account of his beautiful appearance, his strength, and his being the best wrestler in the country. The woman thought to herself, I will have this boy as my husband, as my husband is now an old man and will surely die soon. Chinaza, however, who was as wise as he was strong, was quite aware of everything the jealous woman had done, and although he pretended to be very flattered at the advances of the king's head wife, he did not respond very readily and went home as soon as he could. When he returned to Kwame's house, he told him everything that had happened, and Kwame said, As you are now in high favor with the king, you must go to him tomorrow and beg a favor from him. The favor you will ask is that all the country shall be called together, and that a certain case shall be tried, and that when the case is finished, the man or woman who is found in the wrong shall be killed by the Igbos before all the people. So, the following morning, Chinaza went to the king, who readily granted his request, and at once sent all round the country, appointing a day for all the people to come in and hear the case tried. Then, Chinaza went back to Kwame, who told him to go to his mother and tell her where he was, and that when the day of the trial arrived, she was to take off her ugly skin and appear in all her beauty. For the time had come when she no longer needed to wear it. This the son did. When the day of the trial arrived, Adaobi sat in a corner of the square, and nobody recognized the beautiful stranger as the spider's daughter. Her son then sat down next to her and brought his sister with him. Immediately his mother saw Ada, she said, This must be my daughter, whom I have long mourned as dead, and embraced her most affectionately. The king and his head wife then arrived and sat on their stones in the middle of the square, all the people saluting them with the usual greetings. The king then addressed the people and said that he had called them together to hear a strong palaver at the request of the young man who had been the victor of the wrestling, and who had promised that if the case went up against him, he would offer up his life to the Igbo. The king also said that if, on the other hand, the case was decided in Chinaza's favor, then the other party would be killed, even though it were himself or one of his wives. Whoever it was would have to take his or her place on the killing stone and have their heads cut off by the Igbos. To this, all the people agreed and said they would like to hear what the young man had to say. The young man then walked around the square, bowed to the king and the people, and asked the question, Am I not worthy to be the son of any chief in the country? And all the people answered, Yes! Chinaza then brought his sister Ada out into the middle, leading her by the hand. She was a beautiful girl and well-made. When everyone had looked at her, he said, "Is my sister not worthy to be any chief's daughter?" And the people replied that she was worthy of being anyone's daughter, even the king's. Then he called his mother, Adaobi, and she came out, looking very beautiful with her best clothes and beads on. And all the people cheered, as they had never seen a finer woman. Chinaza then asked them, "Is this woman worthy of being the king's wife?" And a shout went up from everyone present that she would be a proper wife for the king, and looked as if she would be the mother of plenty fine healthy sons. Then Chinaza pointed out to the jealous woman who was sitting next to the king and told the people his story, how his mother, who had 2 skins, was the spider's daughter, how she had married the king, and how the head wife was jealous and had made a bad juju for the king, which made him forget his wife, how she had persuaded the king to throw himself and his sister into the river, which, as they all knew, had been done. But Kwame had saved both of them and brought them up. Then Chinaza said, "I leave the king and all of you people to judge my case. If I have done wrong, let me be killed on a stone by the Igbos. If, on the other hand, the woman has done evil, then let the Igbos deal with her as you may decide." When the king knew that the wrestler was his son, he was very glad and told the Igbos to take away the jealous man away and punish her according to the laws. The Igbos decided that the woman was a witch, so they took her to the forest and tied her up to a stake, gave her 200 lashes with a whip made from hippopotamus hide, and then burnt her alive, so that she would not make any more trouble. Then her ashes were thrown into the river. The king then embraced his wife and daughter, and told all the people that she, Adaobi, was his proper wife, and she would be the queen for the future. When the palaver was over, Adaobi was dressed in fine clothes and beads, and carried back in state to the palace by the king's servants. That night, the king gave a big feast to all his subjects, and told them how glad he was to get his beautiful wife, whom he had never known properly before. Also, his son, who was stronger than all men, and his fine daughter. The feast continued for 166 days, and the king made a law that if any woman was found out getting medicine against her husband, she should be killed at once. Then the king built 3 new compounds and placed many slaves in them, both men and women. 1 compound he gave to his wife, another to his son, and the 3rd he gave to his daughter. They all lived together quite happily for some years, until the king died, and his son came to the throne and ruled in his stead.